The blood on Eleanor Zimmerman's hands had long since dried by the time she finished scrubbing the kitchen floor that September evening in 1882. Her knees aching against the rough wooden planks as she worked by lamplight in the suffocating heat of the Wichita, Kansas boarding house. She had been working for the Thornton family for 3 years now, ever since her father's death had left her orphaned at 18 with nowhere else to turn. And in all that time, she had not seen a single cent of the wages they had promised her mother before she passed. Eleanor stood slowly, pressing one hand to the small of her back as she surveyed the spotless kitchen with tired eyes. She was 21 now, though she felt decades older, her once soft hands calloused and raw from endless hours of washing, cooking, and cleaning for the dozen boarders who rented rooms in the 3-story establishment. Mrs. Thornton kept her working from before dawn until well past midnight most days, always finding one more task that needed completing, one more floor that needed scrubbing, one more pot that needed scouring. Eleanor, the sharp voice cut through the quiet like a whip crack. The gentlemen in room 7 are complaining about their water pitcher. Get up there immediately. She bit back the exhaustion threatening to overwhelm her and grabbed a fresh pitcher from the shelf, filling it quickly from the pump before hurrying up the back stairs. Her dress, faded and patched in multiple places, was the only one she owned anymore. The Thorntons had promised her new clothing as part of her compensation, along with room and board and $5 a month. She had never seen any of it except the tiny closet they allowed her to sleep in, and the meager scraps left over after everyone else had eaten. The man who answered her knock at room 7 was tall, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore dusty trail clothes and his dark hair needed cutting, but there was something in his face that made Eleanor pause, a kindness in his expression that she rarely encountered anymore. "I apologize for the inconvenience, sir," she said softly, keeping her eyes downcast as Mrs. Thornton had trained her to do. "I have fresh water for you." "Thank you, miss." His voice was deep and warm with a slight drawl that spoke of time spent under open skies. "Though I have to say, I did not complain about any water pitcher. Mrs. Thornton came up here asking if I needed anything, and I said I was fine." Eleanor felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and anger. It was not the first time Mrs. Thornton had invented complaints to keep her working longer. "I see. Well, the water is fresh regardless if you would like it." "I appreciate that." He stepped aside to let her enter, and as she moved past him to set the pitcher on the washstand, he added, "You look about ready to drop, if you do not mind my saying so. How late do they keep you working here?" The unexpected concern in his voice brought tears to Eleanor's eyes, and she blinked them back quickly. "As late as needed, sir. There is always work to be done in a boarding house." "James," he said, "James Forrester. And I reckon there is a difference between honest work and working someone into the ground." He watched her carefully, his eyes taking in her worn dress, her thin frame, the exhaustion written in every line of her body. "How long have you been employed here, miss?" "Eleanor Zimmerman." 3 years, sir, Mr. Forrester. 3 years." He said it quietly, but something hardened in his expression. "And in those 3 years have the Thorntons paid you fairly for your labor?" No one had ever asked her that before. The question hung in the air between them, and Eleanor found herself unable to lie. "They provide me room and board." "That was not what I asked." James Forrester moved closer, his voice gentle but insistent. "Have they paid you wages, Miss Zimmerman?" She shook her head slowly, feeling the shame of it wash over her even though the fault was not hers. "They said they would. When my parents died, Mrs. Thornton told me she would take care of me, that she would pay me $5 a month plus provide clothing and necessities." but there is always some reason why the money cannot be spared. Some expense I have supposedly incurred, some broken dish or ruined laundry that must be deducted from my pay. The anger that flashed across James Forrester's face was swift and fierce, though Eleanor could tell it was not directed at her. "That is not employment, Miss Zimmerman. That is slavery, and it has been illegal in this country for near 20 years. I have nowhere else to go," she whispered, the truth of it crushing. "No family, no money to make a start elsewhere. At least here I have a roof over my head and food, even if it is just scraps." James was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her nervous. Finally, he said, "How much would you say you are owed?" 3 years at $5 a month, that is $180, not counting the clothing and other necessities they promised. The sum was staggering to Eleanor, who had not held more than a few coins in her hand since her father's death. "I could never collect it. The Thorntons would throw me out on the street if I even asked. Then it is fortunate that I am doing the asking." James reached for his hat. "Wait here, Miss Zimmerman. I will be back shortly." "No, please." Eleanor caught his arm without thinking, then released it immediately, horrified at her own boldness. "I apologize, I should not have. Please, Mr. Forrester, do not make trouble on my account. It will only make things worse for me." He looked down at her hand, then back at her face, and his expression softened. "Miss Zimmerman, I am a cowboy by trade. I have spent the last 5 years driving cattle up from Texas, living rough and saving every penny I could. Just this week I sold my small herd here in Wichita for a fair profit, and I find myself with money to spare and time on my hands." He paused. "More importantly, I cannot in good conscience stay under this roof knowing that you are being exploited in such a manner. Now, you can either wait here where it is quiet, or you can come down with me, but either way I am going to have words with Mrs. Thornton." There was something in his voice that told Eleanor he would not be dissuaded, and a small spark of hope flickered to life in her chest. She had been so tired for so long, had accepted her fate with such resignation, that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand up for her. "I will come with you," she said quietly. "If things are going to change for better or worse, I should be there." They found Mrs. Thornton in the front parlor, reviewing her account books with the sour expression she always wore when dealing with finances. She looked up as they entered, her eyes narrowing when she saw Eleanor. "Why are you not in the kitchen? Those dishes will not wash themselves." "Mrs. Thornton," James said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel, "I would like to discuss Miss Zimmerman's wages." The older woman's face went through several shades of red before settling on an angry purple. "Her wages are none of your concern, Mr. Forrester. Eleanor is my employee and has been well cared for under my roof." "Has she?" James pulled a chair out and gestured for Eleanor to sit, which she did hesitantly. He remained standing, his tall frame seeming to fill the small parlor. "Because from where I stand, it appears you have been using this young woman as unpaid labor for 3 years, in violation of every principle of fair dealing and Christian charity." "How dare you?" Mrs. Thornton slammed her account book shut. "I took that girl in when she had nothing, gave her a home and food when she would have starved on the streets. The ingratitude is astounding. Then you will have no trouble producing records of the wages you have paid her," James said smoothly. $5 a month for 36 months, plus the cost of clothing and other necessities you promised to provide. I will wait while you fetch the documentation." Mrs. Thornton's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. "Well, there have been expenses, broken items, wasted food. Eleanor has been clumsy and careless, and those costs must be recouped. Show me the accounting." James crossed his arms over his chest. "Every broken dish, every supposedly wasted scrap. I want to see figures, Mrs. Thornton, because I am having difficulty believing that any employee could be so destructive as to incur $180 in damages over 3 years. The silence stretched out, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Eleanor sat frozen in her chair, hardly daring to breathe as she watched the confrontation unfold. Finally, Mrs. Thornton drew herself up with as much dignity as she could muster. "Mr. Forrester, I will thank you to mind your own business. If Eleanor is unhappy with the arrangement, she is free to leave at any time." "Is she?" James turned to Eleanor. "Miss Zimmerman, are you free to leave?" Eleanor thought of the countless times she had considered running away, only to be paralyzed by the knowledge that she had no money, no prospects, nowhere to run to. No, I am not." "Then we have a problem." James reached into his coat and pulled out a leather wallet, thick with bills. Eleanor had never seen so much money in one place. "I am going to offer you a choice, Mrs. Thornton. You can pay Miss Zimmerman the $180 you owe her, plus another $50 for the clothing and necessities you failed to provide. Or I can walk down to the sheriff's office and file a complaint on her behalf. I am quite certain that Judge Morrison would be very interested to hear about your labor practices." Mrs. Thornton's face had gone from purple to white. "That is extortion." "No, madam, that is justice. Which will it be?" The older woman looked between James and Eleanor, clearly calculating her options. Finally, with shaking hands, she opened her cash box and began counting out bills. "This will ruin me," she hissed. $230 is more than I have on hand." "Then I suggest you visit the bank in the morning," James said. "I will accept $100 now and a promissory note for the remainder, signed and witnessed. And Miss Zimmerman will be collecting her belongings and leaving your employment immediately." Eleanor watched in stunned disbelief as Mrs. Thornton counted out $100 in various bills, her movements jerky with anger. James took the money, counted it carefully, then handed it to Eleanor. The weight of it in her hands felt unreal, like she might wake up at any moment and find it had all been a dream. "The promissory note," James reminded Mrs. Thornton. "I will fetch Mr. Henderson from room 3 to serve as witness." 20 minutes later, Eleanor stood on the front steps of the boarding house with her few possessions bundled in an old pillowcase, and more money than she had ever held clutched tightly in her hand. The September night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet, and she felt dizzy with the sudden change in her circumstances. "Thank you," she said to James, her voice breaking on the words. "I do not know how to thank you properly. You have given me my freedom." He smiled at her, and it transformed his whole face, made him look younger and less careworn. "You are welcome, Miss Zimmerman, though I confess I am not entirely sure what happens next. Do you have somewhere you can go tonight?" The question brought Eleanor crashing back to reality. In the excitement and fear of the confrontation, she had not thought beyond getting away from the Thorntons. No, I suppose I will need to find a hotel, at least for tonight." "The Wichita Hotel is respectable," James said. "I will walk you there if you like. Make sure you get settled safely." It is late for a woman to be walking alone. They made their way through the quiet streets, Eleanor's heart still racing with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Everything had changed so quickly that she could barely process it. This morning she had been trapped in what felt like a prison of obligation and exhaustion. Now she was free, with money in her pocket and endless possibilities stretching before her. "What will you do?" James asked as they walked. "I do not mean to pry, but Wichita is not an easy place for a woman alone." "I have not had time to think about it," Eleanor admitted. "I suppose I should look for proper employment. I know how to cook and clean, obviously, and I can read and write. My father taught me before he died. You could probably find work in one of the hotels or restaurants, James agreed, though I hope you will insist on fair wages this time. I will. She glanced up at him, studying his profile in the lamplight. You said you are a cowboy. Does that mean you will be leaving Wichita soon? That was my plan, he said slowly. I have been thinking about settling down, maybe buying some land and starting a small ranch. I have enough saved now to make a decent start, but I had not decided where to settle. They reached the hotel, and James arranged for a room for Eleanor, paying for a week in advance over her protests. Consider it an investment, he said. You need time to catch your breath and figure out your next steps, and you should not have to worry about spending all your money on lodging right away. Eleanor wanted to argue, but the exhaustion of the day was catching up with her, and the thought of a real bed in a real room, with no one to order her around or create impossible tasks, was too tempting to refuse. You have been so kind. I do not understand why. You do not know me. James was quiet for a moment, then said, My mother was in a similar situation once, before she married my father. She worked for a family that treated her more like property than a person. My father helped her get free, and she always said it changed the entire course of her life. Maybe I am just paying forward the kindness he showed her. Where are your parents now? Eleanor asked. They passed several years ago, within months of each other. It was like my mother did not want to go on without my father. His voice was soft with old grief. They had a good life together, though. Built a small ranch in Texas, raised me and my sister. I hope to build something similar someday. Eleanor felt a pang of sympathy for him, recognizing the loss in his words. I am sorry for your loss. They sound like they were wonderful people. They were. James smiled at her again. Get some rest, Miss Zimmerman. Things will look clearer in the morning. She watched him leave, his tall frame disappearing into the night, and felt an odd sense of loss herself. Then she climbed the stairs to her room, locked the door behind her, and sat on the bed, staring at the money in her hands and trying to believe that this was real, that she was truly free. Sleep came slowly, and when Eleanor finally drifted off, she dreamed of open spaces and blue skies, of a life beyond kitchens and scrubbing floors, of a tall cowboy with kind eyes who had given her back her dignity. Morning brought sunlight through clean windows and the sound of birds singing outside. Eleanor woke slowly, luxuriously, for the first time in 3 years, not jolted awake by Mrs. Thornton's harsh voice demanding she start the breakfast preparations. She lay in the soft bed, staring at the ceiling, and felt tears slip down her temples. She was free. After washing up and putting on her worn dress, she counted her money carefully. $100 was more than she had ever possessed, but she knew it would not last forever. She needed to find work, real paying work, and she needed to do it soon. But first, she realized, looking down at her patched and faded clothing, she needed to buy herself something decent to wear. No one would hire her looking like a beggar. The dress shop on Main Street was intimidating, with its large windows displaying fashionable garments that Eleanor could only have dreamed of affording before. She almost turned back twice before finally gathering her courage and pushing open the door. The proprietress, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper expression, looked up from her sewing. Yes, can I help you? I need a dress, Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice steady. Something suitable for work but respectable, and undergarments if you have them. The woman's expression shifted from dismissive to calculating as she took in Eleanor's shabby appearance. I have several day dresses that might suit. They are not cheap, mind you. I can pay, Eleanor said firmly, holding her head high despite her embarrassment. An hour later, she emerged from the shop wearing a new dress of deep blue cotton, with a second dress of gray wool wrapped in brown paper under her arm, along with 2 sets of proper undergarments and a pair of sturdy shoes that actually fit. The expense had been significant, nearly $20 in total, but Eleanor felt transformed. She looked like a respectable young woman now, not a servant or a charity case. She spent the rest of the morning visiting hotels and restaurants, inquiring about employment. Most places were not hiring, and those that were offered wages that seemed barely better than what she had been promised by the Thorntons. By noon, she was discouraged, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake in leaving the security of room and board, even if it had been exploitative. Miss Zimmerman. She turned to find James Forrester riding toward her on a handsome bay horse, his face lighting up when he saw her. He dismounted smoothly and tipped his hat. "You look wonderful," he said, his admiration obvious. "How has your morning been?" Eleanor found herself smiling despite her discouragement. "It has been educational. I have discovered that finding fair employment in Wichita is more difficult than I anticipated." "No luck." His expression turned sympathetic. "Not yet, but I am not giving up." She hesitated, then added, "I was thinking of getting some lunch. Would you care to join me? My treat to thank you properly for what you did last night." James grinned. "I would be honored, Miss Zimmerman, and please call me James. I think we are past formalities after last night." "Only if you call me Eleanor." They found a small restaurant with checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh bread wafting from the kitchen. Over beef stew and cornbread, they talked easily, and Eleanor found herself relaxing in James's company in a way she had not relaxed with anyone in years. "I was thinking," James said as they finished their meal, "about what you said last night about not knowing what to do next. I may have an idea if you are willing to hear me out." "Of course. I told you I was planning to buy land and start a ranch." "Well, I found a property this morning about 10 miles outside of town. It is a small spread, nothing fancy, but it has a good house, a barn, and enough acreage for a decent cattle operation. The previous owner passed away and his widow is moving back east to live with her daughter." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "The thing is, a ranch needs a lot of work, and while I am good with cattle and horses, I am a terrible cook and even worse at keeping house. I was thinking I might need to hire someone." Eleanor felt her heart speed up. "You are offering me a job." "I am offering you employment, yes, but not as a servant. As a housekeeper, with fair wages paid monthly. $7 a month plus room and board, and the room would be your own with a door that locks. You would have set hours and Sundays off, and I would provide any supplies or equipment you need for the work." He met her eyes steadily. "It would be isolated living, I will not lie about that, but you would be safe, and you would be paid fairly, and you would have your independence." It was more than Eleanor had hoped for, almost too good to be true. "Why would you do this? Offer me such generous terms?" James was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "Honestly, because I think you deserve a chance to build a real life, not just survive. And because I liked the person I saw last night, the woman who had the courage to stand up with me against Mrs. Thornton, even though she was terrified. I think you would be good company, Eleanor, and I think we could help each other." Eleanor thought about it, weighing the risks against the opportunities. She would be living alone with a man she barely knew, which could damage her reputation if anyone found out. But then again, her reputation was already not much to speak of, and James had shown her nothing but respect and kindness. More importantly, she would be truly independent, earning real wages and learning to stand on her own feet. "I accept," she said finally. "When would you want me to start?" "The widow is moving out at the end of the week. That gives us a few days to buy supplies and get everything ready." James smiled, and Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest at the expression. "Thank you, Eleanor. I think this is going to work out well for both of us." They spent the next 3 days in a flurry of preparation. James bought the ranch for a fair price, and Eleanor helped him select furniture, kitchen supplies, and all the other necessities for setting up a household. She had never had so much input into decisions before, and she found she enjoyed it, the sense of building something from the ground up. James was easy to work with, always asking her opinion and never dismissing her suggestions. He told her stories about his years driving cattle, about sleeping under the stars and swimming in rivers, and the fierce satisfaction of delivering a herd safely after months on the trail. In turn, Eleanor found herself talking about her childhood, about her father who had been a schoolteacher and her mother who had made beautiful quilts, about the happiness that had seemed so permanent before illness and death had stolen it away. On the morning they were to move to the ranch, Eleanor stood in her hotel room, looking at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was someone she barely recognized, dressed in her new gray wool dress, her hair pinned up neatly, her eyes bright with anticipation instead of dead with exhaustion. In less than a week, her entire life had transformed. James was waiting outside with a wagon loaded with their supplies and purchases. He helped Eleanor up onto the seat beside him, his hand warm and steady on her elbow, and then they were off, leaving Wichita behind as they headed into the open country. The ranch was even prettier than Eleanor had imagined. The house was small but well built, with a wide front porch and windows that let in plenty of light. There was a vegetable garden gone somewhat wild, a chicken coop that needed repairs, and a barn that smelled of hay and horses. Beyond it all stretched the Kansas prairie, grass rippling in the breeze like waves on an ocean. "What do you think?" James asked, watching her face. "I think it is beautiful," Eleanor said honestly. "I think it is the most beautiful place I have ever seen." They spent the day unloading the wagon and setting up the house. James showed Eleanor to her room, a small but comfortable space with a real bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the prairie. He had even bought her a quilt, something she had not asked for, in shades of blue and green that reminded her of her mother's work. "I want you to feel at home here," he said simply when she thanked him. "This is your house too, Eleanor, not just a place where you work." They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Eleanor woke early to prepare breakfast, then spent her mornings cleaning, cooking, and managing the household while James worked with the small herd of cattle he had purchased and made repairs around the property. In the afternoons, she often worked in the garden, coaxing the neglected plants back to life and planning what she would plant in the spring. Evenings they spent together on the front porch, talking as the sun set over the prairie in spectacular displays of orange and pink. Eleanor had never been so happy. The work was hard, but it was her own work, done on her own terms for fair compensation. James was as good as his word about everything, paying her wages promptly at the end of each month and always treating her with respect and consideration. More than that, though, she found herself looking forward to their evenings together, to the sound of his voice and his easy laughter, to the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at her. She was falling in love with him. She realized one October evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out. The realization should have terrified her, but instead, it felt as natural as breathing. James Forrester was a good man, the best man she had ever known, and somewhere over the past weeks, he had become essential to her happiness. "You are quiet tonight," James said, glancing over at her. "Something on your mind, just thinking," Eleanor said. "About how different my life is now from what it was a month ago. If someone had told me then that I would be sitting here on my own porch watching the sunset, I would never have believed them. Our porch, James corrected gently. Eleanor, I want you to know that you are not just an employee here. You are a partner in this enterprise, and this is as much your home as it is mine. She looked at him, her heart pounding. In the fading light, his face was all sharp angles and soft shadows, and she wanted nothing more than to reach out and touch him. James, I know it has only been a few weeks, he continued, his voice low and intense. And I know I have no right to feel this way so soon. But Eleanor, I need you to know that you have become incredibly important to me, not just as a housekeeper or a partner, but as a woman I deeply admire and care for. Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes, but they were happy tears, tears of joy and relief. I feel the same way, she whispered. I have been trying trying to keep things professional, but I cannot help it. You saved me, James. In every way a person can be saved, and I. She did not get to finish the sentence because James leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and tentative, asking a question with his lips that Eleanor answered by kissing him back. It was her first kiss, and it was everything she had dreamed a kiss could be, sweet and tender and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, James rested his forehead against hers. I am in love with you, Eleanor Zimmerman. I think I have been since the night I met you, standing in that boarding house looking so tired and brave. I know this is fast, maybe too fast, but I do not want to hide how I feel. I love you too, Eleanor said, the words coming easily, naturally. I love you, James Forrester, and I do not care if it is too fast. You gave me back my life, and now I want to share it with you. They talked late into the night, making plans and sharing dreams, and when Eleanor finally went to bed, she lay awake for a long time, her lips still tingling from James's kisses, her heart so full of happiness she thought it might burst. The next morning, James proposed properly over breakfast, kneeling beside her chair with a simple gold ring he said had belonged to his mother. Eleanor said yes through tears of joy, and they were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony in Wichita, with the hotel proprietress and one of James's fellow cattlemen serving as witnesses. Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, James patient with Eleanor's nervousness, showing her with touches and whispers how much he loved her. Afterward, she lay in his arms in the bed they would now share, listening to his heartbeat beneath her ear, and thought about how much her life had changed in such a short time. Are you happy? James asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. Happier than I ever thought possible, Eleanor answered honestly. Sometimes I am afraid I will wake up and discover this was all a dream. It is real, James assured her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. You are real, I am real, and this life we are building together is real. And it is only going to get better, Eleanor. I promise you that. The first year of their marriage was hard work but deeply satisfying. Eleanor threw herself into making the ranch a real home, sewing curtains for the windows, planting flowers around the porch, learning to bake bread that James declared was the best he had ever tasted. James expanded the herd and built new fences, working from dawn until dusk, but always making time in the evenings to sit with Eleanor and talk about their day. They had disagreements, of course, as any couple does, but they learned to work through them with honesty and respect. Eleanor found that James never raised his voice to her, never dismissed her concerns or made her feel small. He treated her as an equal partner in all things, asking her opinion on ranch decisions and respecting her judgment. In the spring, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She told James one evening after supper, nervous about how he would react, and was overwhelmed when he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. We are going to have a baby, he kept saying, his eyes bright with tears. Eleanor, We are going to have a family." Their son was born in December of 1883, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Daniel, and Eleanor thought her heart would break with the love she felt when she held him for the first time. James was a devoted father, walking the floor with Daniel when he fussed, helping with feedings and diaper changes without complaint. Eleanor watched him with their son and fell in love with him all over again, seeing this new tenderness in him that the baby brought out. "He is perfect," James said one night, holding Daniel while Eleanor rested. "Just like his mother." Life settled into a new rhythm with the baby. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, and James hired a young man from town to help with the heavier work, giving him more time to spend with Eleanor and Daniel. Eleanor had never imagined she could be this content, this fulfilled. She had gone from being a virtual slave to being a beloved wife and mother, with a home of her own and a husband who cherished her. When Daniel was 2, Eleanor became pregnant again, and their daughter Rose was born in the summer of 1886. She was a tiny thing with wispy blonde hair and a temperament as sunny as her name suggested. Daniel was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her, and Eleanor's heart swelled watching her children together. "You ever think about that night we met?" Eleanor asked James one evening. They were sitting on the porch, watching Daniel play in the yard while Rose napped inside. "How different things would be if you had not stood up for me." James pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I think about it sometimes. But mostly I just thank God I was in the right place at the right time. You and the children, this ranch, this life. It is everything I ever wanted, Eleanor. You are everything I ever wanted." "I used to think freedom was just about not being owned by someone else," Eleanor said softly. "But real freedom is this: having choices, building something of your own, loving and being loved. You taught me that, James." The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. They added onto the house, giving Daniel and Rose their own rooms. James continued to expand the ranch, and it became one of the most successful small operations in the county. Eleanor joined the local women's association and made friends in the community, finally feeling like she belonged somewhere. When Daniel was 10 and Rose was 8, they took in a young girl named Sarah who had been orphaned much as Eleanor had been. Eleanor saw herself in the girl's frightened eyes and was determined to give her the stability and care that she herself had been denied. Sarah blossomed under their care, becoming like a second daughter, and Eleanor felt like she had come full circle, able to help someone else the way James had helped her. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James took Eleanor on a trip to Denver, their first real vacation. They stayed in a fancy hotel and ate in restaurants and walked around the city like a couple of wide-eyed tourists. On their last night, lying in bed in the hotel room, James pulled her close and said, "Do you remember when I told you that this life was only going to get better? Was I right?" Eleanor thought about everything they had built together, the children they were raising, the home they had created. She thought about the terrified, exhausted girl she had been 10 years ago and the confident, happy woman she had become. "You were right about everything," she said. "I love you, James Forrester. I will love you for the rest of my life. And I love you, Eleanor Forrester. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They returned home to find that Daniel had helped Sarah keep the ranch running smoothly in their absence, and Eleanor felt a surge of pride in her son. He was growing into a fine young man, responsible and kind, with his father's strong work ethic and his mother's gentle heart. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. James's sister visited with her family, and it was good to see the children playing with their cousins. They weathered droughts and hard winters, learning to be resilient and resourceful. Eleanor's small vegetable garden expanded into a full operation, and she began selling her produce in Wichita, earning her own money that she saved carefully. When Daniel was 16, he fell in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a pretty girl named Mary who made him tongue-tied and foolish. Eleanor and James watched with amusement and sympathy, remembering their own whirlwind courtship. "You think they will be as happy as we are?" Eleanor asked one night. "I hope so," James said, "though I am not sure that is possible. What we have is pretty special, Eleanor." Rose grew into a thoughtful, intelligent young woman who loved books and learning. She wanted to be a teacher. She announced at 14, and Eleanor and James supported her dreams, hiring a tutor from Wichita to help prepare her for the exams she would need to pass. Sarah married a good man from town when she was 20, and Eleanor cried at the wedding, so proud of the young woman she had become. "Thank you," Sarah whispered when she hugged Eleanor goodbye. "Thank you for giving me a family and a home. I will never forget what you did for me." "We were happy to do it," Eleanor said, meaning every word. "You be happy now, Sarah. You deserve it." On a warm summer evening in 1900, Eleanor and James sat on their porch watching the sunset. They were in their late 30s now, their hair showing threads of gray, their faces lined with laugh lines and sun exposure. Daniel was married to Mary and managing the ranch with James. Rose was away at teaching college. Sarah visited regularly with her growing family. "We did well," James said, taking Eleanor's hand. "With our life, with our children. We did well, Eleanor." "We did," she agreed, squeezing his hand. "And it all started because you saw someone who needed help and you were brave enough to step in. You changed my life, James. You gave me everything." "No," James said firmly, turning to look at her with those blue eyes she still loved as much as the day she met him. "You gave yourself everything. I just opened the door. You are the one who walked through it, who built this life, who became this strong, amazing woman. I am proud of you, Eleanor. I am proud to be your husband." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the Kansas sky turn from gold to pink to purple. Eleanor thought about the girl she had been 18 years ago, scrubbing floors on her knees in a hot kitchen, believing that was all her life would ever be. That girl could never have imagined this, sitting on her own porch, surrounded by love and family and security. "What are you thinking about?" James asked. "About freedom," Eleanor said. "Real freedom. The kind that comes from loving and being loved, from building something meaningful, from knowing you are valued. You taught me what that meant, James. You showed me I was worth more than I believed." "You were always worth it," James said softly. "I just helped you see it." As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge, Eleanor leaned her head on James's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her, strong and steady and sure. This was home. This was love. This was the freedom she had been searching for her whole life, and she had found it in the most unexpected way, with a cowboy who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself. Their story was not about rescue, she realized. It was about partnership, about two people finding each other at exactly the right moment and building something beautiful together. James had paid her wages and set her free, yes, but in doing so, he had freed them both to create a life neither could have built alone. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he whispered back. "Always and forever, Eleanor, always and forever." And as they sat together on the porch of the ranch they had built with their own hands and hearts, Eleanor knew that no matter what the future brought, they would face it together. She was no longer a girl without hope or options. She was a woman who had found her strength, her voice, and her home. She was free in every sense of the word, and that freedom was the greatest gift she had ever received. The years that followed were full and rich. Daniel and Mary gave them 4 grandchildren who Eleanor doted on, teaching them to bake and garden and telling them stories about the old days. Rose became a beloved teacher in Wichita, eventually becoming the principal of her school. Sarah's children grew up calling Eleanor and James grandma and grandpa, and they treated them as such. James's health remained strong well into his 50s, and he continued to work the ranch with Daniel, though he spent more time supervising than doing heavy labor. Eleanor's garden became famous throughout the county, and she published a small book of recipes and gardening advice that sold well locally. They traveled some, taking trips to see Rose and visit old friends, but they always came back to the ranch, to the home they had built together. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Daniel gave a toast, speaking about how his parents had shown him what true partnership looked like, how they had taught him and his siblings the value of hard work, integrity, and love. Eleanor looked around the room at all the faces she loved, at the children and grandchildren, at Sarah and her family, at James sitting beside her with his hand on her knee, and felt such overwhelming gratitude that she could barely breathe. This life, this beautiful, complicated, joy-filled life, had started with one act of courage, one man willing to stand up for what was right. Late that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Eleanor and James sat in their bedroom, getting ready for sleep. James caught her eye in the mirror and smiled. "What would you say if I told you I wanted to do something crazy?" "I would say I married a crazy man, so it would not surprise me," Eleanor teased. "What do you have in mind?" "I want to set up a fund through the church, maybe, to help young women who are in the situation you were in. Women who are being exploited or trapped in bad situations. I want to help them get free, find jobs, get training. We have been blessed, Eleanor. I think we should share that blessing." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Even after all these years, James still had the power to surprise her with his kindness. "I think that is a wonderful idea. Let us talk to the pastor next Sunday." They did, and the fund was established that winter, with a substantial contribution from James and Eleanor to start it. Over the next several years, they helped more than a dozen young women escape exploitative situations and start new lives. Some went on to marry and have families. Some pursued education or training. All of them wrote letters to Eleanor and James, thanking them for their generosity. "You are doing for them what I did for you," James said one evening, reading through the latest batch of thank you letters. "What we did for me," Eleanor corrected. "And what we are doing for them. This is our work, James, together, just like everything else we have built." As they grew older, they grew closer. They finished each other's sentences, anticipated each other's needs, moved together with the easy grace of two people who had spent decades learning each other's rhythms. Their children marveled at how devoted they remained to each other, how James still held doors for Eleanor and Eleanor still packed James's favorite foods for his lunch. "How do you do it?" Rose asked once, watching her parents dance together at a family gathering. "How do you stay so in love after all these years?" Eleanor watched James, his hair now white, his face deeply lined, his body not as strong as it once was, and she felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt the first time he smiled at her. "We choose each other," she said simply. "Every single day we wake up and choose each other. That is the secret, Rose. It is not magic or fate or luck. It is a choice, made over and over again." James came over then, holding out his hand. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Forrester?" "Always, Mr. Forrester," Eleanor said, taking his hand and letting him pull her into his arms. They moved slowly to the music, surrounded by their family, and Eleanor rested her head on James's chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and sure. "Happy," he murmured into her hair. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she answered. "You gave me everything, James. A home, a family, a life full of love. You gave me myself." "You gave me the same," he said. "You made me a better man, Eleanor. You made my life meaningful. I cannot imagine having lived it without you." They held each other close. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. Their story had started with an act of courage and kindness, but it had grown into something much bigger, a legacy of love and generosity that would continue long after they were gone. When James passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68, Eleanor held his hand and whispered that she loved him, that she would love him always. The grief was crushing, but she found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the memories they had made, in the life they had built together. She lived another 10 years, still active and engaged, still tending her garden and helping with the fund they had established. She spent time with her great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their great-grandfather, about the cowboy who had seen a woman in need and chosen to help her, changing the course of both their lives. On a warm September evening, nearly identical to the one when she had first met James 50 years before, Eleanor sat on the porch of the ranch, surrounded by her family. Daniel sat beside her, his hair gray now, his own grandchildren playing in the yard. Rose was there with her husband, and Sarah with her grown children and their families. "Tell us again, Grandma," one of the great-grandchildren said. "Tell us how you met Grandpa James." Eleanor smiled, her eyes far away, remembering. "I was in a very dark place," she began, her voice still strong despite her years. "I had lost hope, lost myself. And then one evening, a cowboy with kind eyes walked into my life and showed me that I was worth more than I believed. He paid my wages and set me free, and in doing so, he freed us both to build the most beautiful life I could have imagined." "What happened after?" the child asked. "After?" Eleanor looked around at all the faces watching her, at the family that had grown from that one act of courage. "After, we lived. We worked hard, we laughed often, we loved deeply. We raised our children to be kind and strong. We helped others when we could. We built a home and filled it with joy. That is what happened after." As the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Eleanor closed her eyes and felt James's presence beside her, as real as it had been the day he died. She had lived a full life, a good life, a life rich with love and meaning. She had been freed from bondage and had found her strength. She had been loved completely by a good man, and she had loved him in return. When Eleanor Zimmerman Forrester passed away peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by her family, her last words were, "I am coming, James. Wait for me." They buried her beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky as big and blue as the day they had first arrived there together. The headstone read Eleanor Zimmerman Forrester, 1861-1911. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she lived free. And in the years that followed, the ranch continued to thrive under Daniel's management, and the fund they had established continued to help young women find their freedom. And the stories of Eleanor and James were passed down through the generations as a testament to what could be built when courage met kindness, when one person chose to see another's worth and act on it. Their love story had started in a boarding house in Wichita, Kansas, with a cowboy who paid a woman's wages and set her free. But it had grown into something much greater, a legacy of love and kindness that would endure long after they were gone, proof that one act of courage could change not just one life, but many, rippling out through time like waves on water, touching hearts and changing lives for generations to come. The ranch house still stood on the prairie, weathered but strong, filled with new generations of children and laughter and love. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the grass and the stars came out to shine, some said you could still feel their presence there. Two souls who had found each other and built something beautiful, whose love had transformed not just their own lives but the lives of countless others. That was the legacy of Eleanor and James Forrester, the servant who became free and the cowboy who freed her. Two people who chose to see each other's worth and build a life based on that recognition. Their story was a testament to the transformative power of love, courage, and kindness, and it lived on in the hearts of all who heard it, a reminder that one person's choice to do the right thing could change the world.